Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, my name is Cydney, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm also a drug addict. And I thought I'd throw that in there. It's always good to remind myself of all of my shortcomings, if you will, or all of my attributes. It depends on how you look at them. I'd like to thank Sandy in absentia for asking me to come and speak tonight, and for Nancy for calling and reminding me. I'd like to welcome the newcomers to Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a program for living. It's a program for learning how to live sober. And I'll tell you, for me, I would never have been able to stay sober and clean and been comfortable in sobriety if it wasn't for Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps. The program for living is in the 12 steps. So welcome to a new life. And Terry, thank you very much. It was wonderful listening to you. All right, so what was it like? I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I can't remember when I got here, but I didn't come to AA on September 25th, 1986. I checked myself into a treatment center in Burbank at St. Joseph's Medical Center in Burbank. They had in those days, they had those alcohol treatment centers that, were endowed by the insurance companies, and I had an insurance policy that, covered it. So that's where I went. I did not go there because I had a problem with alcohol. I went there because I had a problem with drugs. And I was motivated to go there because I had been told by someone with whom I had worked that I was in very deep trouble. They did not know what my problem was, but I'd better get some help. And I had already gotten another job down in San Diego. I was getting prepared to do what I believe they call geographics. And I was going to pick up everything and move down there and open up a new unit at a very major medical center. And, I heard, by the grace of God, I heard this woman when she told me I had a problem. And she didn't say I had a problem with alcohol or drugs. She said, you got some kind of serious problem, you need to get some help. And I came home. I remember I came home that day, and I remember picking up the telephone and calling Jim Conway. He was a guy who had come to work at St. Joe's in Burbank about 3 years earlier to start this drug and alcohol treatment center, and I was running this entire education department out there. I gave him his first office, and I was still drinking then and still using drugs. As a matter of fact, he and I ran the beer booth at some fundraising thing. But I liked Jim, and I had my eye on this treatment center. I had a keen interest in it, who knows why. But I called him up and I told him that I had a problem with alcohol, and no, not alcohol, drugs. I had a problem with drugs. I needed to go through the program, and he said, well, come on over. We have a 28-day inpatient program, come on over. And I said, well, I don't have that kind of a problem. I want to do the outpatient program. And he said, no, you come over, if you want to come into the program, I want you to do the inpatient program. So then I had to figure out how to manage my life. I had to try and do the inpatient program without letting anybody know about it. So I was going to drop out for 28 days. And I was living by myself at the time. I'd left my husband and my 3 children. I was living by myself in my own condominium out in Tarzana. And I had 2 cats that needed to be fed, so I called an old girlfriend of mine. We had been in, about 10 months earlier, we went to England, to London together, and we toured there for about 2.5, 3 weeks. And I called her to tell her that I needed her to feed my cats. I was going into this drug and alcohol facility. She wasn't the least bit surprised. She didn't say, "Oh my God, not you." She said, "Okay, where's the key?" And it never occurred to me afterwards, that maybe, the way I happened to have behaved in London with her for 3 weeks might have given away my problem. Because I had done some really wacko stuff over there. And I said, I explained it to her that it was because, I had been single for longer than she had, so I really knew how to live. And she'd only been divorced for a week or two, and so she didn't really quite know how to party yet. God, I haven't thought about this stuff in so long. But I went, so off I went into this treatment center, not going to tell, and I was going to keep it a secret. And I did call my sister and brother-in-law when I was there after a day or so, and I called my ex-husband and let him know that I was there, and none of them said, "Oh my God, why?" But I stayed. I went into that program, and I stayed there for the 28 days. And on the first day that I walked into that facility, I was so ashamed. And I had worked there. I wasn't working there anymore. They had let me go about 1.5 years or 2 years earlier. But I was ashamed. I actually when I walked in there, I had to go have all these x-rays downstairs, and it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I told them that I had to have, I would not go in the hallway unless I had a blanket over my head so people couldn't see me. So here I am going at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night, right? Nobody's in the hospital who I would know, with a blanket on my head. I'm being rolled around so I could have my x-ray. That's how egocentric I was. I was so worried about people finding out. I would not, and the only reason I would be allowed myself to be admitted was that I did not have to take my meals downstairs in the cafeteria with the rest of the people. They would have to give me my meals upstairs. I didn't want anybody to see me. And they said, okay. Jim said, fine. I was just so ashamed at the time. And, so I had my meals upstairs. By the time the end of the 28 days was up, I was so sick of eating upstairs, I was downstairs in the cafeteria eating with the rest of the group. But I stayed for I stayed in that program, and I felt, what I remember feeling when I first got sober was this incredible sense of relief. Like, God, I didn't have to do it anymore. And they took a Polaroid. They came around when they got you all settled in your room, and they took with a Polaroid camera, and they took a couple of pictures of you. So, and they, kept one for your file, and the other one they gave to you, and they said, here's a Polaroid picture of you. You can do whatever you want with it. Well, let me tell you something about this picture. I wrote my sobriety date on that picture, which was my admission date, and that picture still sits in my medicine chest today. So when I open up that chest, that cabinet, that picture's in there. Now, I don't look so hot, so I have it turned around, so I only see the back of it. But every once in a while, I'll flip it around so I can see what I look like on the day that I was admitted in that treatment center. But I stayed, I stayed for the 28 days. I went to all the meetings. They told me that for the first couple of days that I was there, that I didn't have to go to any of the meetings. I was going to get sick, so they would put me in the detox unit, and I told them I wanted my clothes back, that I wasn't that bad of a drug addict, I wasn't going to be detoxing, so give me back my clothes and I'm going to class, because I'm a student by nature anyway. So they gave me back my clothes and I went to class, and boy, I got so sick. And but I showed up, I put those clothes on and I shook, and I ran to the bathroom, as many times as I needed to, and I started to sweat, and I got sick, because I never ever, and that's when I realized, I really had a problem with drugs, because I never ever stopped taking them, so I didn't have any idea what it was like to stop and, go through withdrawal. But I was in that treatment center with a bunch of people from the Hollywood scene, from the production scene, so these guys were all in there. They were all, heroin and cocaine addicts. They were just all, they just got the biggest kick out of me, watching me get sick. Because when the first time I ever identified in that meeting was as a sterile opiate addict, And they just laughed me right out of the room. Because, I was a special kind of an addict. I was not a street user. I only, I couldn't get into the alcohol at the time because I didn't identify as an alcoholic, but I identified as a drug addict. And this is part of my story. So I stopped doing that immediately as soon as they started laughing at me. And so I identified as an addict alcoholic. And then I became an alcoholic addict. And then about 3.5 years sober, I became an alcoholic. And I've been an alcoholic ever since. Now, so, and I'll tell you why, I progressed through those stages. Because, God reveals things as we're able to handle them. And when I was when I got out of that treatment center, I did what they told me to do. I was terrified. I thought maybe I'd be struck drunk or I'd pick up drugs again. I was fear-driven and fear-based when I got out of that hospital. I didn't want to pick up drugs, and I didn't want to drink again. And I was terrified. I didn't think I had any options. I thought I had to do exactly what they told me I had to do. I thought, and you know what? Thank goodness for fear. Fear is a great motivator, and it motivated me, into Alcoholics Anonymous, and doing exactly what they told me to do in that treatment center. I went to aftercare there. I went to a state-run program to protect my license. I did for the first 2.5 years of sobriety. I had this regimented thing that I was doing between Alcoholics Anonymous, between the state, and between the aftercare program. I was kept extremely busy in program, and I'm dearly grateful for that today, because it really gave me the basics for the program. As I was walking down the hall when I was about to be released from that program, there was a counselor there. His name was Mark. I still remember what he said to me. As I'm walking down the hall and I'm saying, "Bye, Mark, I'm out of here." And he's saying to me, he said to me, "Cydney, you go to Alcoholics Anonymous. Make sure you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, because all we did here was to get you sober. If you want to stay sober, the program for living is in Alcoholics Anonymous." And he told me before I left that I was leaving that program with 28 days of sobriety, but that I was to stand up and identify as a newcomer for my first 90 days when I got out. And I said, "Well, I don't have to do that. If you're 30 days sober, you don't have to do that." And he said to me, "You do yourself a favor and you identify as a newcomer. I don't care if you raise your hand and say, 'I have 32 days or I have 64 days. You raise your hand as a newcomer for 90 days, he said, because people will come up and introduce themselves to you, and you'll start to meet people in the program." And that was a very wise thing that he told me to do, and so I did. I would let you know how much sobriety I had. I'd raise my hand and say, "My name is Cydney, I'm a newcomer, but my counselor told me," and then I had a story, but the hand went up. I had this many days. And it was a wise thing for me to do, because people kind of took me under their wing, and they took care of me, and they took me to meetings, and I met a lot of people on the program early on. I met the man that I'm married to today. I met when I was about 40 days sober. When I got out of that treatment center, I went home. I was living in the condominium by myself, and they didn't make me go to a recovery home. Everybody was getting segued off to recovery homes, but they didn't, for some reason, they told me I didn't have to do that. I called up and I bowed out of the job that I was supposed to take down in San Diego. I did that when I was in there for the first week, and so for whatever reason, they told me that I could go home, and I just had to come back to aftercare, I think, every day for a month or two. But so I went home, and I remember going back to that condominium, and I needed to find meetings to go to, and I didn't really know anybody in the program. I had nobody in my family who were alcoholics. I was the first one of my generation, and so I picked up the phone. I had a friend of mine who was a nurse, and we'd been hanging out together for years. We were part of a group we had a lot of mutual friends, and I knew that she was over at Felicity House. So I called her, and I told her, I said, Barbara, I just got out of this treatment center. I was in St. Joe's, in the detox center, and I need to go to meetings. And she said to me, oh, really? Did you relapse? And I said to her, no, I've been out for 3 hours. I haven't relapsed yet, Barbara. Why are you asking me that? And she said to me, well, I thought you'd been on the program for a long time. I said, what? No. She said, well, you have all your keys are on AA chips in your kitchen. And I said, what? What are you talking about? She said, you know that plaque you have that Jonathan made you? John was my son. I said, sure, because she'd been in my apartment. She said, that plaque, all your keys, because she are on AA chips. They're hanging in your kitchen. I thought you had been on the program for a long time. I just never wanted to ask you because I didn't want to, I figured you would have told me. Well, I was upstairs when I was talking to her about that. And, I said, no, they're not. They were on AACN chips, which was an organization that I belonged to. And I hung up. She told me where to go to meetings. She said, meet me at the Marina Center. And I hung up, and I went downstairs, and I walked over to that plaque, and I looked at those keys, and they were all on AA chips. I had my mailbox key was on a red chip, and I think those were 90-day chips. And my garage key was on a green chip, which was a 60-day chip. And I had the pool key on a yellow chip, and I had a blue chip that was hanging there with nothing on it. And you know something? I looked at those chips, and I started to cry, and I remember where I found them. When I had taken this job, and this just gives me the chills when I think about this. When I had taken a job, when I had left my husband to come down to finally live my life on my own, I had taken a job at St. Joe's as the director of an Department of Education, and they'd given me an office with a big, huge desk in it. And when I went into that office that first day, I opened up the drawer, and in the top drawer were a bunch of colored poker chips that had numbers on them with keychains. And I scooped a handful of those chips out, I put them in my purse, I went home to the condominium, and I put all of my keys on them. I had no idea they were AA chips. And they'd been hanging there for 3 years. Now, when I left my husband in 1983, it took me from 83 to 86 to reach my bottom, and those chips had been up there for 3 years. And you know what? Here I was riding around that hospital with a thing over my head, and the guy who owned the desk before me was the assistant CEO of the institution. It was his desk, and they were his chips. He was the guy who had started the meeting, the barefoot meeting in the hospital, the big Friday night meeting. So I still kind of giggle about that, today. But that was my spiritual awakening. That was when I realized at that time that there was a God out there. And I don't think I've had another experience like that since. But I remember just standing there in the kitchen of that condominium with those chips in my hand and just starting to cry and thinking, oh my God, how could this be? So what I did is I was living in Tarzana, and I got in my car every morning, and I drove across the hill, and I showed up at the 6:45 meeting at the Marina Center, Monday through Friday. It was a step study, and they had and guess who was there? Sophie was there, laughing like she's laughing today. Making coffee with my husband in the back of the Marina Center, and I picked him out, of that meeting. I'll tell you, because he was the only guy there who had on Italian suits and and alligator shoes, and I thought to myself, you know what? At least they're not just there's not one bum here. There's some guy who's dressed well. I picked him out. I had an eye on those shoes and an eye on that suit. So, and I kind of, kept an eye on him too, because I liked the way he dressed. He always was dapper in the morning, always looked together. Little did I know. Little did I know. In any event, so I showed up at that meeting every morning, and I got I identified as a newcomer, and I met some wonderful people in that meeting. I went out to breakfast at the Crest House a lot, and then there was a man there who used to go to that meeting, Bill Dubois, and he told me that I needed a step study meeting. There was a new one starting at Santa Monica Hospital, and that he wanted me to go to that meeting. And so he told me that I was to meet him for dinner, and then from there we were going to go to the meeting together. And I thought he was interested in me. You know, I was so egocentric, I thought anybody who looked at me cross-eyed was interested in me. I don't know if he was or not, but he took me to that meeting. And you know what? I started this step study meeting at Santa Monica Hospital, and there was this big woman who was she was huge. She looked like she was about 6'10", and she had this booming voice, and she was very into the steps, and she was very, she knew what she wanted and how she wanted it done, and and so she was running the meeting. Her name was Penny H. I thought she had 87,000 years of sobriety, but I think she had about 16 years. And so she started that meeting, and Bill told me I needed to get a commitment, and I told her that I wanted the book commitment. Now I have a tendency of slipping into meetings about 30 seconds after they start. And so Penny said to me, yes, you can have the book commitment, but you're to get here 10 minutes early with those books so you can pass them out. If you can't be here on time, don't take the book commitment. So I took the book commitment, and I started to carry those books. And I had a temporary sponsor at the time that I had gotten out of the treatment center, and and she had gotten me into the steps right away. She'd made me. I don't remember ever writing a first or second step, but I do remember. I do remember writing an inventory for Sally, and I did that pretty early, and at least I started writing it. And Sally also told me that I was not to get involved in my first year of sobriety. I promptly got involved when I was about 45 days sober with somebody on the program, and it didn't work. I mean, it was like my picker. Believe me, I was not too well wrapped in early sobriety. And so, I chose someone who was not really the best thing for me. And I don't think I was very good for him either, but he was about 4 or 5 years sober, and he's getting involved with somebody who was 40 days sober. Needless to say, it caused me some pain, so I remember calling her and telling her, and she said to me, I told you not to get involved with somebody, and she got really upset with me. And I was upset. I thought, how could she do this? And so I needed to talk to somebody, so I had to call that big woman who was running that meeting. I had her number, because for the books. And so I called her, and she said to me, meet me at, what did she say? She said, meet me at Norm's. There was a Norm's on Pico. And so I sat across from her at Norm's, and I talked to her about what was going on. And she said to me, well, there are no rules in Alcoholics Anonymous that says you can't get involved in your first year of sobriety. So why don't you call your temporary sponsor back, and talk to her about it and see if you guys can work it out. And if it doesn't work out, I'd be glad to sponsor you. That scared me to death. I didn't want any part of her boy. She was rigid and had her definite opinions on things. So I wanted somebody who was a little more wishy-washy I could manipulate. So that was Sally, and she looked good too. Her husband was a producer. So I went back to Sally, and we worked it out, and Sally apologized. She said, I was out of line. It's none of my business. It is not up to me to manage your life. It's up to me to share the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, my sponsor told me that. Bug out. And so, Sally and I stayed together for 9 months, 9 or 10 months, and I am very grateful to her. She took me through my fourth step. I wrote it for her. She told me how to do it. She said, it's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. There are, open up the book, turn the page, and, it's all outlined there. I want you to draw 4 columns on this. She gave me this big, huge, this legal-sized pad of paper. She drew out the columns. She labeled the columns on top. She gave them to me, and she said, I think the first one was resentments, and the second was, where I was at fault, what were my fears. I know the first was resentments, who caused it, what were the defects of character, and then what was my part in it. So I had the labeled thing. I went home, and she told me I was to say a little prayer, and I was to write every morning for 5 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, and no more than that, and I could take the weekends off. So everybody's whining about their 4-step. I was about, 2 or 3 months sober at the time, and everybody I thought were just like whining about their 4-step. Oh, man, it's painful, it's this, that. I whipped this, she went off on location, I whipped this thing out in about 3 weeks. No problem at all. I thought, what is this problem with everybody here? They're having such pain. Mine was no difficulty. I wrote the whole thing out, I called her up, she got back into town, and I said, okay, I'm ready for my 5th step. And so I take this thing over to her house, we go into the bedroom, we sit down, I start to read it. I don't think I get past a page and a half, or maybe I had 10 pages. She says to me, she says to me, listen, honey, you need to do it again. I said, what? What I had managed to do on those 4 columns is to write the person who was at fault and then take their inventory very nicely in all the rest of the columns. There was no part on my part wasn't in there. And I had managed to just, really fix this whole thing up. But I had everything in there. I had the ex-husband, the sister, the mother, the father. I had all the key people in there. But I had, and I was devastated. I remember starting to cry and saying, oh, you're not going to make me have to go do this again. And she kind of winked at me. She said, well, you kind of got an F on it. But all you're going to have to do is go back and just fill in that last column. I just want you to go back. You don't have to write everything else. Just fill in the part that says where you're at fault. And I had no idea what she was talking about. And she said, here, just turn the page over in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm not a page person in that book. But if you look at that book, I think it's on 66, isn't it? Something like that. If you look at that, there are those columns. You got to turn that page over. And you got to read a page and a half to find out where you're at fault. And it says, now we look to see where we are frightened, selfish, self-seeking, dishonest. Frightened, dishonest, self-seeking, and selfish. I think there's 5 of them. Whatever. Judgmental is always in there too. And you know what? It took me another 5 months to finish that inventory because it was so painful to look at my part in it. And then when I finished it, what happened is that I got sober in September, and in June I had to move from Tarzana over here to the west side of town. It was time for me to go. I was leasing a condominium, and they wanted the condominium back. And I called Sally, and I said, Sally, I need to move. I'm terrified. And I'd already gotten a job on this side of town. And she said to me, I'll help you find a place. You don't have to do anything alone. And she and I went looking, and I found this beautiful condominium over here on Palms Boulevard. And I moved into that condominium. There were only 9 units in that building, and 2 people on the program, 2 of them were occupied people on the program, who I knew for meetings, that Monday night meeting. Norma was in one of them, and this, oh gosh, I forgot her name. This other couple were upstairs at the top, and the couple on the top floor, he had about 20 years, and she had about 18. So I had a solid base here. And when I moved into that condominium, I shared that inventory with Sally, and I had this great sense of release. And what happened after that is my mother became very ill, and she was dying, and I needed somebody to help me with the mother issues. Sally couldn't do that for me, but guess who had a great deal of knowledge on walking through death and dying and issues with their mother? This big woman, Penny H, from the meeting. So I called Penny, and I asked her if she would sponsor me. And I called Sally and said, I'm going to move on. And Sally said, okay. And so Penny sponsored me from about, a little over a year sobriety until I was about 9.5 years. And you know what? I am just eternally grateful to her. She is an inventory person, and every time I pick up the telephone and call her, she would tell me to write. And every time I wrote, I'd take it over to her and I'd read it. And when I read it, it gave me some clarity. And from the reading would come the defects of character. And she was a 6 and 7 person. She was really onto that stuff. And so I would do the 6 and 7 step. I'd go home and I'd get quiet, and then I'd see what the defects of character are, and then I would try to control them. It took me years in this program to realize that the 7-step prayer says, "My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, not that I should know what my defects of character are, because I'm never going to be selfish again. I'm never going to be dishonest again. Today I will not be dishonest." That is an absolute guarantee of walking right down that path one more time. But over the years with Penny, I learned how to kind of let this stuff go. And all she would say to me is, all you have to do is get down on your knees and ask for the willingness to become willing, to let go of the defect of character. And then she just get up and do the next indicated thing. And she said, one day you will realize that it's gone in that instant, in that particular situation. Not that it's gone forever, it just means that in this particular situation where you tend to be selfish, you're no longer selfish. Then it crops up over here. And then it crops over here. I mean, it's perfect. The program says this is a program, it is not a program of perfection, it's a program of progress. And that's what these steps are. They're for us one day at a time, one defect at a time, one situation at a time. And that's what gives me the freedom of being able to live with the program like a loose cloak. So I know that it's there to help me, and it's a never-ending thing for me. I want to tell you how I became an alcoholic on this program. When I was about 3 years sober, I fell and I hurt my ankle. I don't know what I did to it. I tore all the ligaments in it. It was damaged anyway from I used to play soccer, and I twisted my ankle. You can only sprain your ankle so many times before you lose the stability in it, and that's what happened is that I fell and I really, really badly injured the ankle, and I wound up in the emergency room and I had to have a cast on it, and I was in terrible pain from it. And I remember sitting in my apartment. They had sent me home with this big, huge splint on my leg, and I was sitting there the next morning and I was just shaking. And the lady came from upstairs, the lady who was with all the sobriety, I can't remember her name. She came downstairs and to check on me, and I was sitting on the couch and I was just shaking like a leaf, and she said to me, "My God, what is wrong with you?" And I said to me, she said, "Is your leg hurting you?" And I said, "Oh, it's killing me." She said, "Do you have medication, pain medication?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Have you taken any?" "No, I can't take any, I'll ruin my sobriety." She said to me, "For God's sakes." I said, "I'm a pill addict, I'm a drug addict, I can't take it." She said to me, the medication was prescribed. You are shaking like a leaf because you have pain. Take the medication. What does it say in the label? We read the label together. She said to me, "It says you take 1 to 2 of these things every 6 hours if you have pain." She said, she poured 2 out and she said, "Take them." She went over and she got a glass of water and she made me swallow them. And she said to me, "In 6 hours," and she wrote the time down, "if your leg hurts you, you take 1 more. And in 6 hours after that, you call me. And every 6 hours after that, you call me. And you and I will talk about whether or not you need to have that medication." And you know what? I did what she told me to do. And when I stopped taking that medication, because what happens with me is with medication is that, the pain goes away and then I still think I need it. Do I need this or do I not need it? And when I start thinking, is it really hurting me enough? That's when I need somebody to discuss it. And that's when I can slip into, the trouble. But what happened is that I took these for a couple days and I stopped. And when I stopped taking the medication, I had an obsession to drink that lasted for 6 weeks, like nothing I have ever had. Now, why have I never had an obsession to drink? Because I never tried to stop drinking. I used to always drink. Whenever I wanted to drink, I drank. And when I didn't want to drink in the morning, so I took pills in the morning. Because drinking was only, you're not an alcoholic if you don't drink before, in my mind, if I don't drink before 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'm not an alcoholic, okay? So I started taking other stuff during the day, to get me through to 4:30, to the time when it was easy for me to drink. And then I drank, and then I passed out every night, and I went to bed. And that's how I drank. And when that obsession hit me, I picked up the phone. I remember calling Penny, and I told her, I was terrified. I said, Penny, I think I need to set my sobriety date, reset it. I had an obsession to drink. She said, honey, have you taken a drink? I said, no. She said, come to my house tonight. And I showed up at her house that night, and the reason that she wanted me to come there is that she had a bunch of people that were doing a 12-step call on someone who had gone out after 10 years of sobriety, who had taken a drink. And what she told me that night was, the reason you want to drink, Cydney, is because you're an alcoholic. And alcoholics drink. And she said to me, you're also a drug addict. And drug addicts want to use drugs. And she said, you're going to periodically, during the course of your life, want to drink and want to use drugs. That's who you are. It doesn't mean you've gone out because you want to. You just don't pick up, no matter what. And that was a lesson for me. And that's when I realized that I was an alcoholic. And over the next couple years, I remembered things about what it was like. I remembered the time when I was living in Santa Barbara. I had moved there with my children. I remember I had run out of pills. And I remember I woke up in the morning, and the mornings were horrible for me, because when I would wake up, I'd get this fear that would just attack me. Fear, and then my head would just go a million miles. Oh my God, I have to get up. Oh my God, how am I going to do this? Oh my God, I can't do this day. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I remember, if I got a couple pills in me to take the edge off that, I was fine. Well, I didn't have any pills that morning, and I went to the cupboard, and I pulled up a bottle of scotch, J&B. And I went into the bathroom, and I tipped that bottle up, and I took 2 big, huge chugs off that bottle, swallows off that bottle, and then I put it back, and I brushed my teeth well so my kids couldn't smell it on me. And I'll tell you what triggered my remembering this. Listening to a friend of mine on this program share it from a podium about doing exactly the same thing, and I remembered that. And to this day, I remember, I know that feeling, that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. I remember when I pulled that jug down and tipped that up in the bathroom thinking, something's wrong here. Something is very wrong here. I put it back, and I went out and got a prescription refilled so I could use the pills in the morning. That's the cunning, powerful, and baffling part of this disease. This is a disease that is, an incredible thing. This is a disease that I have, by the grace of God, I've learned how to live with it sober for over 15 years. But it is a disease that I've learned to honor, and it's a disease that I've learned not to act on. And I've learned that here in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm truly grateful to have found my way here. Thank you.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.